This is a video on graphs, an introduction to graphs. So the graphs that we will be using in physics class are going to be line graphs. We will be using quadrants 1 and 4. So just to remind you, quadrants 1 and 4 mean that the x-axis values will be positive, and the y-axis values can either be positive or negative. The reason why our x-axis values will always be positive is usually time will always be on the x-axis when we are using time. So first and foremost, a proper graph requires graph paper. So you need to make sure that you have access to graphing paper. You also need a straight edge. Even if you feel like you have a steady hand, you really need a good straight edge in order to be able to draw lines of best fit. So our graph has to begin with a title, which gives us some understanding as to what variables are being used. So displacement versus time is a perfectly fine title. I have displacement on the y-axis, and I have time on the x-axis. Each axis has its variable labeled and the unit in parentheses in SI form, Standard International. Here I have the variable and the unit. The axes have regular increments. So the x-axis goes up in this graph by 1s, and the y-axis by 5s, and down by 5s. So the increments have to be regular, meaning they have to go up in regular increments, be spaced evenly apart, but the regular increments between the y and the x-axis can be completely different. If you have more than one set of data being plotted, you need to have a key. Color coding is great, but you don't have to use it. So I've shown here that car 1 is both purple and uses X's, and car 2 is green and uses circled dots. So if you don't have different colors, you can use X's and circled dots. If you have colors, by all means use colors. So another thing that I wanted to point out is the types of lines that we will have. So we will have either straight lines, and remember that straight line does not mean horizontal, it just means that it has a constant slope. So here's a straight line or a linear line, and here is a non-linear line, meaning it's curved. So we will either have curved, non-linear, or we will have straight, which are linear lines. There are also two different aspects to the slopes. If it tends to have a downward slope to it, a downhill slope, that is a negative slope, and a negative slope can either be non-linear or it could be linear, like my chopstick. Similarly, if a line has a general uphill trend to it, then it's a positive slope. And again, a positive slope can take many forms. It can be like this, it can go whoosh like that, or it can go like this. So those are the aspects to a graph. We use graph paper. We have our axes clearly labeled with regular increments. We have our data points labeled. If we have more than one set of data, we use a key. And you need to start to be able to recognize different types of slopes.